Good morning, friends. I just want to share a simple thought with you as we wrap up the week. And this truly isn't intended to be anything world shaking, but maybe just causes us to sit back and just go, for a moment. And that's the thought that those who are legalistic in their view of God's law or how we ought to live the Christian life, as the scribes and Pharisees were certainly legalistic, these folks actually limit and reduce, they diminish the very law they claim to hold so rigorously to. Consider how this relates to what we've learned not just this past Sunday, but throughout our Lord's corrections of the people's misunderstandings about the law in Matthew 5. Because the scribes and Pharisees would have claimed essentially to be perfect according to the law themselves, at least as they understood it. You'll remember that when the rich young man came to Jesus asking what he must do to be saved, Jesus quoted for him roughly half the Ten Commandments, the latter half dealing directly with loving one's neighbor, and the young man's response was, "All these I have kept." Now, Jesus goes on to give him instructions on how he could put those laws into practical application. And we see by his response there that he was not, in fact, actually keeping those laws because he went away sad and apparently did not do what the Lord told him to do. But he had claimed that he was keeping them. All these I've kept. And that was the default perspective of the scribes and Pharisees, of the religious elite of the day. They considered themselves perfect in relation to the law. And since they were perfect, they demanded that all others attain that same level of perfection, to rise to their standard. And they had very little mercy, if any at all, for those who couldn't follow in their footsteps. They were that legalistic in their demands. And yet throughout Matthew 5, what does Jesus reveal about their understanding of the law to begin with? Well, he revealed that their understanding was so very limited. That the only way they could consider themselves perfect was by ignoring a massive portion of the law, by adding their own rationale to the law, such that they could create loopholes and escape clauses to make it easier on themselves, by taking the law out of its context so they could apply it in ways that they wanted to, rather than how it was supposed to be done, and so on. So many various things. They claimed to uphold the law. They claimed that the law was the most important thing in their lives. It was the guide for their lives. It's what they devoted themselves to. But really, it wasn't true at all, because in order to claim their own perfection according to that law, they had to reduce the law and change the law and distort the law to a level that they felt they could actually manage. And then and only then were they able to pat themselves on the back. So whether we're talking about the Pharisees of the first century Israel or the legalistic Christians of today, understand what is really happening. Whether it's to comfort yourself when somebody else is trying to be legalistic toward you, or if you have legalistic tendencies yourself. Let us understand that legalism does not actually elevate the law to its proper status. Rather, it reduces it to something that we or that person feels they can accomplish. We latch hold of the parts we like, the parts that seem to be easy enough to obey, or that we just don't have any natural, so some sins are come at us more than other sins. And so he's like, well, the parts of the law that I'm not inclined to break, I'm going to hold on to those parts, and then ignore or distort the rest. And then we impose the expectations that we feel we can meet on other people, legalistically, of course. But friends, the one who truly appreciates the law and understands it for what it is, and kind of keeps it up at the level that it belongs to be at, that's the one who actually bows in submission before the law, in light of the law, recognizing the absolutely unattainable requirement that it puts on them. And that person bows and submits themselves and then repents before the Lord for their great and burdensome sin in light of the law, leading them to seek God's forgiveness and to be saved by his grace apart from the law. Sometimes people with a legalistic bent think that those who focus on grace actually do an injustice to the law. They do violence to the law because they're trying to skirt around the law. But really, the folks who rightly rely on grace, on God's grace for salvation, they do so because they have a true realization of and appreciation for exactly what the law is and what it does demand. And they know they could never achieve that themselves. And so they look to Christ. The law is holy and righteous and good. The legalistic people don't understand just how holy and righteous and good it actually is. Because they can't be that holy or righteous or good to maintain it or to keep it. but they assume they can, and the only way they can do that is to reduce its actual level of holiness and righteousness and goodness. But the one who seeks grace is the one who has been broken and convicted by how holy and righteous and good the law actually is, and so they are contrite in response. They are repentant and sorrowful in response for their great sin. And they seek grace then because they understand just how perfect the law really is. So friends, let us see the holiness and righteousness and goodness of God in the law. And then let us turn to Christ for his gracious salvation, returning to the law only in his power to be sanctified, not justified, but sanctified, to live as he would have us live in godliness, in the measure that he provides, until the time in which he perfects us once and for all. So have a good and godly day, and Lord willing, I'll see you Sunday.